My name is Robin Bernardo, and this is my ED 508 reading reflection video. I'm going to talk about stereotypes and how I, as well as how other people might want to look at them in the classroom and out of the classroom. The first reading I'm going to talk about is a short reading. It's called Being a Native American Is by Reuben Snake. It's really short, and it's just basically a listing of what it means to be Native American. In the video, the whole thing is that it's so short and simple, but it's a lot of what consists of what he thinks is important to him. It's important to being a Native American, and a lot of these things aren't things that we really think about when we see someone that is Native American or someone that's African American, or just think of a different race. It's almost as if we need people to tell us these things, because the thing we're going to do first is we're going to make some kind of judgment based on the way they look, because that's often all we have, or how they act. And then that often sometimes leads to judging them in things and cognitive abilities or in other aspects of life that really has nothing to do with the way they look. That's where part of the problem is when you have stereotypes. Is it basically just gives you a second of what a person is, but a person is more than a second. He's complex. They have thoughts, beliefs, feelings, like the ones in the article that really express what it means to be Native American. It's not just about coming from America or having your land taken from them. There's just some of the things, but it's not all of the things. And if you really want to talk about it, you can talk about how the whole article doesn't have nothing to do with gambling. A lot of the stereotypical jokes that we often laugh about or we pass on aren't usually covered in the true essence of what it means to be a certain race. Snake's reading is an extreme example of what you might want to do in the classroom. People want to know everything there is about every student, but that's not very realistic. Instead, we, I guess, have to be considerate without knowing all of that stuff. We should pretty much treat every person as if we were aware of their culture, as if we were knowledgeable about their ancestors, about how they lived. And I guess it's a compromise. That's what I'm suggesting, that we should still be considerate without having to have that much information about a person. The next reading I reflected on is The Threat of Stereotypes by Joshua Aronson. It talks about how stereotypes dealing with the way people think in particular can affect the way they perform, and the result was quite astonishing at first if you haven't seen it, and I hadn't seen it when I read it the first time. I guess the most common stereotype that we're talking about was how African Americans have a stereotype that they're not as intellectually competent as their Caucasian counterparts. And even though they might not agree with that, it still affects them. If it's there at all, if they even think about it, it affects them in the way they perform on tests, at least according to the results of the study. Aronson suggested to incorporate the study into teaching, to encourage students to have great expectations of themselves. and just a way of breaking down a stereotype, pretty much attacking its foundation, saying that new students don't really have a reason to have such a low expectation of themselves and of others. And and I agree with that. I think that you should encourage students to accomplish the best that they can accomplish, which is in most cases more than they think they can. For my final reading, I'm going to talk about a lecture that was transcribed. The speaker was Judge Sonia Sotomayor. She talked about how your race and how, in general, race and your gender and just who you are as a person can affect the way you make decisions. And that's easy to see how that can be related back to teaching. Actually, I would even say that it's even more important in a judicial court than it would be in teaching. I guess the argument could be made for the other side, but in the court you have to have certain values, or else it just isn't a community accepted trial. You need to have integrity. You need to have a fair due process. Without these things, we can't have a sound base for making a decision in court. Likewise, in teaching, you need to be sure that every student is getting equal opportunities in theory. We don't always have fair opportunities. We need to be sure that we are teaching and we are treating students in a way that somehow supports the diversity of the whole class. Something we are always talking about how we should always be aware of how race, how gender, how our diversity in general affects us. She was also criticizing the United States because we're probably one of the most, if not the most, diverse country in the whole planet, but we also have this ridiculous philosophy of ignoring race and pretending like it doesn't exist, when sometimes that's exactly what we need to be doing. We need to acknowledge that that person over there might be African American, or the other person over there might be Asian American. And these two people think completely different depending on the background. And ignoring that fact doesn't really make teaching easier. It makes it harder in many cases. So Sotomayor's article really gives a guideline on how we should act as professionals when it comes to things like diversity, race, and gender. Something really stuck with me was her quote from a classmate. It said basically that there isn't an objective stance. There are only a series of perspectives, and something that I really agree with. I always feel like there's so many different ways you can approach diversity, so many different ways you can handle having students or just people of different races and different ethnic groups in the same room. There isn't really a exclusive one way of addressing diversity. There's always multiple ways of doing it, some more effective or more comfortable than others.